Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. In this video, I'll be sharing my VR to Chris at Elemental Cartomancy, who has started a tag called HowIUseOracle. And I'll link Chris's video below where he starts the tag. If you haven't already watched it, go check it out. He talks about some of the ways that he reads spreads of Oracle cards, as well as combines Oracle and Tarot, and gives some examples of different kinds of readings using different decks. And I definitely learned a couple of things that I would like to try with Oracle cards from his video. So check it out. And for my VR, I'm going to be sharing some of the ways that I use Oracle, many of which though are not actually in readings. I do, of course, read Oracle cards, but I also use them for various other purposes in my practice. And so I'll be talking about those as well. I will timestamp the video below because, I can ramble when I have, all the time to talk about something that I like. So without further ado, the first way that I would use Oracle, that I do use Oracle, is for a single card draw, which usually for me is in the morning. And then that way I can think about the card throughout the day, maybe journal about the card a little bit in the evening about where the theme of that card showed up throughout my day, or maybe I'll just journal in the morning after I draw the card. And an example of a deck that I really like to use in that way is the Saltwater Reading Cards by Laura Bowen. And I've shown this deck on my channel many times, but one of the reasons that I like to use this deck for daily draws, logistically speaking, is because it's very large, and on my reading table I would not be able to do a 9-card spread with this, for example. But the other reason that I love to use this deck for a daily draw is because Laura Bowen writes fantastic guidebooks. And so each card has a name, and then it also has a keyword or phrase. So for tides, for example, is cycles. And these are dot paintings. Laura Bowen is an Indigenous artist from Australia, and she used the feathers of seabirds to do these dot paintings. They're really incredible and detailed. And so I really like to use this deck for a single card draw, because what I will do is pick a card and I'll have a generic question like, what do I need to look out for today during my day? Or is there something that I need to consider right now before I go about my day, and pick on that basis. And then I'll go to the guidebook and I'll read what the guidebook has to say. And for each card there's quite a bit. And they're very kind of open-ended and flexible meanings, and certainly give suggestions for messages that this card might bring and things to consider if this card comes up. So it's a really good deck for that. There's lots of decks in my collection that I like to work with for a single card draw, but I figured for each of the uses of Oracle that I'm going to share in this video, I would share a deck that really kind of exemplifies how I would do that thing. So this one for daily draws is that for me. I do use Oracle decks for multi-card readings, laying out Oracle deck cards in a spread, but I actually don't do this with all that many Oracle decks. There's only a few in my collection that I will read completely on their own, do a reading with one deck, and that deck is an Oracle deck, and draw multiple cards. Very, very few Oracle decks do I actually work with that way. One of the ones that I do work with that way is the Journey Oracle, and this is by Kelly Fitzgerald at The Truth in Story. I'm sure folks have seen these beautiful cards before. I have this deck in 2 sizes, in a mini as well, and I really like this deck. There's something that feels very druidic to me about this deck, which suits me well. And this deck came with, in the guidebook, a number of different spreads to read. And one of them, for example, is a kind of honeycomb style where you would put the different cards together that really utilizes the shape of the deck really well. And so you could do this with with just 4 cards, or you could have 7, which is the way that I would do that. So with 1 central card, for example, and then the 6 going around it. So I really like that spread from the guidebook, and it's a kind of general check-in spread. So this is one that I would do a reading with no other cards, no other tools at all, just with this Oracle deck. This Oracle deck does come with one extra tool that I will mention, which is that each one comes with a different D20. So if you get this deck, you'll get a surprise, what color the D20 is. And so if you draw, for example, plant for physical support, you could roll and find out which plant from the guidebook that this one might be speaking to. And there's space to make your own list of 20 plants as well that would, suit your local ecology or suit your spiritual practice, your outlook, and so on. So this is a deck that I really love to use for multi-card readings, all on its own. Don't need anything else to go with it. Just read these cards in a spread. The third way that I work with Oracle cards that I will mention, that's probably no surprise, and I imagine that everybody who does a VR will share some variant of this, is reading Oracle cards in combination with tarot cards in a spread. So a lot of the time when I'm reading cards, I guess in general, I don't necessarily have really solid spread positions, like a question for each card, for example. I like to read a little bit more free-flowing, for example, in a grid or just in a line, and play around with reading how the cards relate to each other. Not so much with specific card positions. Sometimes I do specific card positions, but it depends what I'm doing. But something that I really like to do when I am using a spread with very clear positions, so even something like a past, present, future spread, or a start, stop, continue is another one that I like, or a I don't really use the Celtic cross very much, but something like that where each placement really means something specific. I like to always draw multiple cards for each position and read them together in combination. And so something I will do with Oracle is I will incorporate them that way for each position in a spread, draw 1 tarot and 1 oracle. Sometimes I might draw 1 tarot and 2 oracles from 2 different decks. It depends on what I'm doing and how big I'm getting. But I like to combine and draw with a tarot card. And one of the decks that I like doing this with the most to incorporate into a spread with tarot, pull a tarot card and 1 oracle card and read them in combination for a single spread position. And that is the Nature Magic Oracle. And this is by Kristen of Over the Moon Academy. And this is a black and white oracle deck. So it looks really great with any tarot deck, in my opinion. And it has these different kinds of adjectives on it and imagery related to plants or to nature magic in general. I feel like most of them are plants, but they're these kind of descriptor words. And I find that this adds a really nice layer to doing a tarot reading that could speak to how the tarot card that comes up for that position is manifesting energetically, or how it might be affecting me, how the tarot card in the spread position's energy is coming through. So for example, it could be coming through in an abundant way, a very strong presence, a strong message, or it could be more depleted, could be more exhausted. So this is one that I think is a deck that, besides just being a great deck, and I really like the imagery and the theme, I find that this is a deck that plays very well with others, this deck. It goes really well with any deck that I've ever put it with. I got this Kelly Bear pouch with a leaf charm to put it with. So that's the Nature Magic Oracle, and that's my go-to for combining in a spread with tarot. Though again, there are lots of oracle decks in my collection that I will do that with. I do find some work better than others though in combination, and this is one of the best in my opinion. If you watch my end of the month recap videos, you'll know that something I do in my practice that always includes an oracle card is picking a animal of the month. So at the end of each month, I choose the kind of animal of the month for the following month. And then during that month, I learn about the animal. I pay attention if I see it. Most of the time, I'm seeing it maybe on television or, in a story or in a news story or in a book or something like that. A lot of the time, the animals that I'm choosing, I don't necessarily see just outside, unless I pick like squirrel or something. Then I will see it. But I have quite the array of animal decks, as folks know. And I never use tarot decks for this. I do have a couple of tarot decks that are animal themed tarot decks, but I find that I prefer animal oracle decks. So as an example, there's the Flora and Fauna of Africa by Jesse Jumanji. This is one of the most recent, I think it's the most recent animal deck that I have gotten. And you can see it doubles as a plant deck, of course, flora and fauna. It has a flora and a fauna on each card. So I have worked with some of these animals on different months of this year, and I like to rotate the different animal decks through for that animal of the month. And sometimes I'll pick an animal of the day if I'm feeling really so inclined, or pick an animal as a final message at the end of a tarot reading or at the end of a different kind of reading. An animal to come in at the end as a final takeaway message is great, I think. And so I love animal oracle decks like this one, the Flora and Fauna of Africa. And this one has short messages on it. I do also like animal decks that don't, because then it can be entirely shaped by my own learnings and interpretations. But this one, the messages and the animals go really well together, I think. And somehow I've put these back facing the wrong direction. There we go. Making a mess as I go. So that's choosing the animal of the month, and that is something that I do with oracle decks. Something else I do with oracle decks is kind of what I will call intention setting or goal setting, or trying to represent something in a working that I'm trying to bring about in myself or in my life, trying to foster more of, trying to embody in some way, something like that. So I like to use these oracle cards when I'm doing that, and I never really shuffle for that. If I'm trying to visualize something and bring it about in my life, I'm going to be picking from the cards face up and finding the one that best represents my intention, and then I will maybe put it in a card holder so that I can see it in my sacred space and have it there for however long I feel like it needs to be there to do what I want it to do, to help me do what I want to do. And there's a lot of decks in my collection that I would say can fulfill that function for me. One of them that I do really like for this is the Dark Moon Damsel Oracle. These are the backs. This is a deck by Lorena Joy. This is a deck on Printer Studio, I think. It might be Make Playing Cards. I'm 90% sure that it is Printer Studio, though. And so this one is also one that's good with tarot in a spread. But if I'm trying to, get something done, I might draw a card like Destination and have it out where I can see it to help me with that. There's lots of cards in this deck. I'll just show some of them that are good for that kind of work. For me, I like this one. Sleep is an area where sometimes I need a little bit of help. I struggle with sleep. Fortitude, these are great to help with visualization kinds of work. And this is just, I really like the color palette in this deck. It's a lot of my favorite colors in this deck. And it looks really beautiful, just a card sitting out. This one, mending relations. Working on strengthening intuition. There's lots of great cards in here. Gratitude work. The thankful card. Starting something new. So this is a deck that I really like working with in that way, and putting a card, usually just one, but it could be two, out to bring about some effect in my life, in my world. And that's the Dark Moon Damsel Oracle. I also like to represent a reading's theme with an oracle card. So if I'm doing a tarot reading or a tarot oracle combination reading, or reading with some other tool or system like OM or whatever I might be working with, sometimes I like to have something on my table that represents either my question or the reason for the reading, or an overall theme that I'm wanting to do a reading about. And that will be something that's chosen from an oracle deck most of the time. And it'll be an oracle deck that I'm not incorporating into the reading in any other way. So it's an oracle deck that I'm not shuffling and pulling cards from. It's just I've chosen some cards deliberately to sit in the middle of the table, and I'll lay out my reading around them. And this is kind of a representation of that reading. And so just as an easy example, there's quite a few decks that I like doing this with, but I have the Arcana of Astrology by Claire Goodchild of Black and the Moon. I think this might be mass market now. This is not the mass market version. This is the older indie version. And so this deck, I'm sure many people have seen it, has some cards for the moon phases in it. It has also some eclipse cards. It has some different asteroid cards in it. I'm not sure if the mass market and the indie are different, so please don't go buy the mass market assuming it will be identical to this one. It won't. It has a card for each of the zodiac with the beautiful constellations there. And it has cards for each of the planets, astrologically speaking. So as an example, working with this deck as a representation of my reading, if I am doing a reading for myself, as I tend to do, at, say, a new moon in Cancer, then I will take these two cards out of the deck and I will put them beside each other just like that in the center of my table, and then I will draw my tarot and oracle cards around these cards in the center. And for me, this helps me to keep focused on what's going on, and why I'm doing the reading. In this case, this one is really about timing more than anything. I do a reading for myself every new moon and every full moon. But there are other decks that I will work with where I might draw a card that represents a particular concept or a particular area of my life. Like if I'm reading on a question about a romantic relationship, an intimate relationship of some kind, then I might pick a card from an oracle deck that I feel like really represents that area and put that in the middle of the table and read around it. So there's lots of ways that I would do this. The other thing that I find helpful about this, besides the fact that it helps me to visualize what I'm reading about and why and when, is that it also helps me remember if I take a photo of my reading that I did for myself, and maybe I'll make it my phone background screen, or I'll just have it, I'll have a photo of it so that I can look back at it later. I'll remember, oh, okay, this is the reading that I did on that new moon in Cancer, right? And I'll remember, the new moon in Cancer, I could probably look at the date and figure out that that's what it was, but it's a quick way to know what the context was. So I find that to be useful for a number of reasons, and oracle cards are a good tool for that. I also use oracle cards, some decks anyway, to inspire things like meditation and journaling. And this may not be, in the context of a reading answering a particular question. I do tend to journal those out as well when I'm reading on a particular question, but I might just want something to prompt my meditation for the day, or to inspire me to do some writing, something like that. And so I'll pick an oracle card often for that. I really like oracle cards for this, often more than tarot, because I feel like then you're not stuck so much in the tarot system. And I love a system, and I don't feel that the tarot system is restrictive in the context of doing readings. But sometimes if I'm not trying to answer a particular question, I'm not trying to read on a particular topic, I just want to, say, meditate on a concept or meditate on an idea, then for me, something like an oracle card with a single keyword on it that is not bound up with any broader system can be a better prompt for me. And a deck that I really love for meditation purposes, also for journaling purposes, and for pathworking meditation in particular, is another deck by Kristen of Over the Moon Academy, and that's the Life Path cards. And I've talked about this deck before on my channel because I love this deck. And so this deck has different pictures of paths in it. And this is a deck you can totally do a reading, just drawing a few cards or a card of the day, but these I find are really interesting meditation prompts. And sometimes that will look like trying to pick the card that represents the path that I want to be on, either what I want my day to look like, or what I want a particular area of my life to look like, or a particular shift happening in my life to look like, and picking one out of the pile, that best represents that, and thinking about why. And other times it might be to just shuffle the deck and see what comes out. So these are fantastic and evocative, and I really like just the clean white border that you can imagine just climbing right into and seeing what that space feels like. So the Life Path cards are great for meditation and for journaling as well, which is something I like to use Oracle for. And then the last uses of Oracle that I wanted to share are a couple of things that are quite deck specific. And this in my, what is this called? Timestamp below. I'm calling using Oracle to inspire my activities. And there's a couple of decks that I have that I think are really great for this kind of work. And so those are a deck for Wonder Walking by Amy T. Wan. And this is a deck that I'm sure folks have seen as well. And the idea, of course, of this deck, the deck for Wonder Walking, is that you could pick a card and it would inspire going for a walk. And so these are watercolor images with usually a single keyword. I think a couple of them might be very short phrases, but keywords for the most part. And I've done readings with this deck, but mostly I like to use this one as it is intended to inspire my walk. So I might, shuffle the deck a few times and then pick a card, and let's say I chose the belonging card. These cards are really beautiful. If I chose the belonging card, then I would go, I have a larger guidebook that is sold separately from this deck, but the deck also comes with a little, it's not a little white book, a little green and blue watercolor book, and go in here and look for belonging. And there is a question, how do we belong here? What are the physical evidences that we are a part of all of this? So that could be something to think about on a walk in my local area. And then this fold out has some other ideas around what kinds of engagement the cards invite. So for example, this is in, the belonging card is in a suit called the physical realm. And the guidebook mentions these cards invite physical, tangible exploration of our real world with our senses, encouraging us to be more awake and observant. And so that would be something to inspire the walk. And the bigger book has more in terms of different prompts and things, but that's a kind of very specific use of an oracle for this specific deck. Similarly, and this is my last one, I also like to work with Space Between the Notes by, Space Between the Notes is L. Ron's website. The Spirit Doodle cards by L. Ron Mills of Space Between the Notes. There we go. For inspiring daily activities as well. And this deck is so much fun if you haven't seen it. They are doodles with a keyword and a elemental association. See them here, let go, ask, decide, and so on. And the reason that I like the spirit doodles for inspiring daily activities with the oracle deck is because of L. Ron's book that goes with it. And so for each card in the book, there are quite a lot of ideas. There are some meanings and some reflections, but then there's also a prompt, there are keywords. There is an emotion when you get the card, an emotion to develop when you get the card. So that's a prompt of something to do, right? To cultivate something in particular. There's an affirmation. There's a self-care activity. There's a selection of music to listen to. There's a tree, there's an animal, and a whole host of other associations. So this is one that I will actually pull a card and listen to the suggested music or see what the self-care activity is and if it's something that I could do or could do a version of. So in that way, that's another deck that inspires an activity. So those are my ways that I use Oracle. Single card draws, multi-card readings combined with tarot, choosing my animal of the month, setting intentions or visualizing something that I want in my life or in myself, representing the theme of a reading or the context or timing of a reading, meditation and journaling prompts, and prompting activities. So thank you so much for watching my video of how I use Oracle, and thank you especially, of course, to Chris at Elemental Cartomancy for starting this tag and for sharing the way that he uses Oracle in his reading. Wish you a great day, and I will see you again soon.